Hi everyone, my name is Fernando de los Rios, and I'd like to tell you about my experience with SDK with SaaS connectivity framework. Okay, I created a few connectors already, and I must say I enjoyed the experience. It's been actually easier than I first thought. So I encourage you to try by yourself. And I hope this session and everything we've done so far encourage you to get started and save you some time, especially when getting to it. Okay, so let me this is going to be a short session. Okay, you must be tired already. Three items basically. I think it's important to have an overview of the current connectivity options that we have from a historical perspective as well. And then SaaS connectivity practical use cases, because SaaS connectivity is not only for SaaS, okay, as we will be able to find out. And finally, we're going to have a practical session and show you the anatomy of a connector for a REST interface. Okay, so SailPoint has more than 200 connectors at the moment, ever growing, and I like to see them in two categories: dedicated connectors and generic connectors. Okay, dedicated connectors, basically you have a technology, we have a connector, and it's easy to connect, and it's dedicated to that specific technology with knowledge about the data in there. But generic connectors have more obviously generic. We have the limited text, JDBC, and LDAP. They are totally bound to the protocol, but they totally depend on the schema you might find beneath them. You have Web Services Connector, which could be considered the predecessor of SaaS connectivity framework. This is like in between a fully generic connector and an HTTP only connector. Okay, and finally we have custom open connectors and SaaS connectivity framework. Okay, the custom open connector is like the Java based connectors that we have that are more complicated to get started with, and that's one of the reasons that we started with the development of SaaS connectivity framework. Okay, so for our REST interface, for SaaS connector, for everything that works that has an HTTP connection or REST, some kind of a REST interface, we have three main options to get this work. One is SaaS connectivity, another one's web services, and finally custom open connector. Out of these three, I like to tell you how I think they stack up. In terms of available operations, I'd say all of them are pretty complete. SaaS connectivity only lacks like password pass-through and some of the features that we will be adding in the future. Okay, but you can consider that SaaS connectivity at the moment for like 90% of the 99% of the occasions is gonna work for you. Is gonna have full features. Okay. In terms of ease of use, you may think that Web Services Connector is something that you could be more comfortable with to get started than SaaS connectivity is, but I beg to differ. Okay, because the Web Services Connector may be very friendly because you have a UI and you just need to fill out the operations that you want to implement. But as soon as the end system and your account and entitlement structure do not match, then you need to add a lot of glue in terms of rules. Rules are difficult to debug, difficult to insert. So you have a much better experience with SaaS connectivity, I must say, and we'll see more in detail later on. And finally, the custom open connector. Of course, you can do whatever you need with it, but it comes at a cost. Okay, it's more difficult to put together, so the developer experience is much better if you if you go for a SaaS connectivity and you can work with that. Next, from a maintainability and distribution perspective, I think SaaS connectivity is the best as well, because from a maintainability perspective, you can use Git, you can use versioning a versioning system to keep track of it. And also, you can do the same with a custom open connector. Not so much with web services, but when it comes to distribution, SaaS connectivity, as you could see in previous sessions, you can pack everything together and you can deploy. You can share whatever connector you want in a packed in a zip file, so somebody else uses it in their tenant. Or you can also keep all the files together. About the custom open connector, it's also very possible, but if you consider that with SaaS connectivity, you just need to upload a file and you have the connector ready in your system, opposite to custom open connector, where you have to upload a file and you also need to add additional libraries and stuff like that. I think SaaS connectivity is the best option here. And in terms of virtual appliance, web services and custom open connector both require a virtual appliance. SaaS connectivity does not need a virtual appliance, but it's been announced that we will be able to support one in the future, optionally, which is very interesting in terms of to connect to your on-prem systems. Then some practical use cases. First of all, I wouldn't think of SaaS connectivity as a SaaS only connector. Okay, of course, it's like the most evident use case that you can support. It's like you have a SaaS application. We don't have a connector for you. You can create your own with SaaS connectivity, but not only. Okay, apart from the fact that since we run on Node and you have a plethora of modules and npm modules that you can use, and you can leverage SDKs from the actual vendor. There's also very interesting use case I've been exploiting, which is the IDN loopback concept, which basically is using the SaaS connector in order to trigger and to treat IDN like it was yet another managed system. Okay, take a sip. First example would be the platform roles connector, and with the platform roles connector, what we try to do is to manage all the IDN capabilities, which is you give admin permissions, report admin permissions, help desk permissions, etc. on the platform through a connector. Okay, so you can use roles, you can use that in certifications, you can request it from the request center, all that stuff that you use with that you do with a final system, you can do with IdentityNow. And on top of that, you can also grant access to and grant and remove access to governance groups, which is something that we get that we often get asked if we can do. Is like a use case that you may think is not possible because it's not evident in the platform, but with a simple SaaS connector, you can make that possible. Then I also created the account certification loopback connector, which basically uses the loopback, the SaaS connectivity to fetch identities and to fetch identities. It turns the identities into accounts. It also turns those identities into entitlements, and then every account has a single entitlement, okay, which is its own account. So when we use those contents on a certification, we can basically, when we remove that entitlement, we are disabling the identity or IdentityNow. Okay, so it's another like kind of creative way of using the API, and also with in combination with the SaaS connectivity framework. Finally, I also created the orphan accounts loopback connector, and the orphan accounts loopback connectors, thanks to the SaaS connectivity framework, allows you to manually correlate an account, an orphan account, to an existing identity. Basically, with this loopback connector, what you can achieve is to you request on behalf of the you have like your orphan accounts get promoted to entitlements, and then you assign the entitlements to the recipient identity through an access request. Okay, so pretty handy too. And you can save yourself the hassle of downloading a file. On actually not only the hassle, but you can delegate orphan account correlation to your users through the request center. Okay, so again, I think it's a matter of getting creative on the capabilities this has, and especially for folks that come from Identity IQ, I think it needs a different mindset. Okay, sometimes it's not. You may think IdentityNow is not capable of doing something, but it does the same, but it does it in a very different way. Okay, so take into account your options. And now, an overview of the anatomy of a connector. What we see is, especially when if you come from a web services connector perspective, the web services connector background, you will be familiar with the connection operations. Okay, those connection operations generally have a match on the SaaS connectivity and SaaS connectivity operations. They have different names, but this is basically the list of the one-to-one, like a map between web services connector operations and SaaS connectivity operations. Okay, things to note: Delta aggregation is coming soon. Okay. And custom authentication comes implicit. Okay, it's something that you don't need to select. It's not an operation per se. It's how you handle your operation within your code. Pass-through authentication, I hope it comes. I think it's an interesting feature to have. Then some things to note is that in Web Services Connector, you have the update account operation, you have the add entitlement operation, and you have the remove entitlement operation. You have the STD account update operation only in SaaS connectivity. This means that you need to differentiate the operation that you want to manage based on what I'm going to tell you next. Okay, we will see this in practice. Also note that for the STD account create, this and I need to mention this because this may throw you off, and I don't want you to get confused at first. When you first request an entitlement for somebody, and that person doesn't have an existing account on the target system, in the Web Services Connector, we used to have a create account operation, right after an add entitlement operation. You're not gonna get that on SaaS connectivity. What you need to take into account that an account create operation generally comes with an additional entitlement operation. Okay, so with your STD account create, you need to create the account and you need to add the entitlement to the account. Depending on the systems, you're gonna do this in one go, or you may need to create the account first and then run whatever and call whatever function, whatever endpoint that takes care of adding that entitlement to the created account. Okay, I hope this is clear. Then finally, before we jump to the demo, I must say this is totally based on my own experiences and preferences. So, I mean, this is no dogma by any means. So, do whatever you want, get whatever is useful for you from this, and feel comfortable with whatever you choose to do. Some key takeaways. So, what I'm gonna show you next is that I find very helpful to start by building an Axios client, okay, and map all the raw API calls. But I put no logic in there. It's like I was having a Postman session. I'm manually inspecting the API, and that's going to be my client. So no logic, no error handling. Everything, all the logic and error handling goes somewhere else. Okay, that's how I do it. That's what works for me. Then what I do is I generally create an object class to represent the account and the entitlement. Okay, and that object class has a constructor. Okay, that will accept the raw output of any account. I mean any call to a read account or a read entitlement kind of endpoint. Okay, this helps me quickly create a compatible object to return to the connector. Okay, and this is also something that we will see next. Then index.ts is where you saw Philip. Index.ts is the file where you define all your connector calls, okay, all your operations. So I always put all the logic in there. If you need some helper function somewhere else, by all means you can use the same file, or you can create your own and import them. That's completely up to you. But I must say that these connectors, generally speaking, are not huge in terms of lines of code. Okay, so generally index.ts, I feel comfortable with having index.ts to have everything, like my helper functions and my method and my operation definitions. So that's what I do. And finally, I grew very fond of a VS Code plugin called REST Client, and I think this works wonder in combination. I mean, when you are developing this kind of connectors. Okay, and I'm gonna show you next. And let me switch to VS Code, but before I'm gonna take a sip. You are already familiar with this file, with the connector spec. I'd say the most important things to know from the actual structure of a connector is that your connector spec will be your configuration. Index.ts would be your definition. And then HTTP client, or whatever you want to call it, it's the actual client. It's the actual REST client where I have all the raw calls I need to use in order to fetch data or to push changes. So starting from the configuration, this list here, you can add more or less depending on how on the features of your connector. This is exactly the same thing as as feature strings from IdentityQ. Okay, so it's the same concept. You can remove if you are not going to implement some commands, okay, some operations. So IdentityNow knows that connector doesn't support, for instance, I don't know, maybe an account creation. Okay, so it doesn't bother to send an account creation to the connector, and instead it creates a manual task or something like that. Okay, then you have source config. This is the configuration. You define the configuration in here, the input, how you want to the information you need to run an instance of this connector. Okay, this goes to the source, and here you can have one section, or you can have multiple sections. If I show you how this looks like, this configuration is made out of two different sections. Edit configuration, okay, and it goes here. Okay, so this is the first section. You can add comments, etc. And I decided to do the to group the connectivity stuff in here, and some other some different configuration on this other on this other section. Okay, so that's available to you. Then you have account schema and you have entitlement schemas. Okay, things to note here. Don't think, I mean, this is not the exact same. It's not the exact same format. Okay, and schema. Yeah, the exact same format as IDN schemas. Okay, if you inspect the API and you return a call, or you use the VS, the Unix VS IDN plugin, okay, you will get account schemas in a similar fashion, but not exactly. Okay, so don't copy and paste from other sources. Just follow the guidelines in the documentation, or take another connector as a sample. Then this is the account schema. And then you, as Philip mentioned, you need to define your group attribute. This is the link between the entitlement and the account. But contrary to IDN schema, you don't. If we find the group attribute schema, I mean, sorry, then the group attribute. It's roles. You can see the type is string. You may have expected to have a group type of attribute, but at the moment doesn't work like that. And Brian, this is something that I would like you to clarify. If we currently support multiple schemas or not yet. It's not too problematic. I've been using a single schema type at the moment to manage different kind of schemas. I'll show you how I do it. Okay, but it would be very good if we supported multiple schemas. I think, I mean, we are getting ready for that, just because it says, I mean, this is a plural. Then beyond this, you have the account create template, which is the account create provisioning policy. And that will be all. Thing to note is that generally when you develop this kind of connectors, you're gonna work. Maybe you have a preliminary phase that you do locally, and then you upload the files, the connector to IdentityNow, and you start testing it on IdentityNow. When you do, take into account that neither account schema, neither your schemas nor your provisioning policy, I mean your account create template, are going to be updated on the source you configure based on this connector. Okay, it's like this. You can take this as a template. When you create a new source based on this connector, those are going to be the initial settings. Okay, but then if you want something different, you want to update it at any point, you need to update it just the same way you would any other connector. Okay, so keep that in mind, because when you start developing this, you may think that because you change the template here, you change the schema, or you change your account create template, then it's going to be updated when you upload the file. But that's not the case. Okay, so keep that in mind. Next thing I like to mention is I talked about the plugin. Okay, I have two files here. It's generally how I work. First of all, I create the API.http. I mean, you can call it whatever. And here with this plugin, you can just type your. It's like a file that contains all the different calls you're gonna do, and you can reference the output of a previous call from a call after. And in this case, if I want to authenticate, I've identified the the endpoint, I mean the REST call that I'm going to use to authenticate. So this is the output. So I know how the output looks like. This is going to help me afterwards. And if I want to fetch the users, this means that I need to be authenticated first. Then I just reference the output of the previous call. I run this, and I get the users. Okay, I get whatever content. Then when I define this, when I define the calls this way, then it's gonna be very easy for me to copy and paste these contents here to the client, to the HTTP client. Remember that I told you that I generally don't use any logic in this client. I'm going to tell you about next. Okay, but before I do, the HTTP, this REST client, I mean this REST plugin is helpful for this reason. And also, if you check my actions, HTTP, Philip, I think, is doing this in a fancier way. Okay, but this is a little bit more manual, and that's actually how I started. So I keep doing this. This helps you with local testing. You can do an npm run dev, and you spin up your local your local instance, okay, your local server, and you connect to it with this connection. Of course, I mean this means that you need to provide the configuration, and also you need to provide the input, if any. So this helps my testing each one of the implemented calls, and I can define, I mean, this aggregation, so there's no input. But when it comes to input, like in this case, I mean, an account enable, I need to provide the input, okay? And I'll show you next how you can actually, because sometimes figuring out the right input for the system is not easy. And you better copy and paste it from an actual connector run, maybe from a previous aggregation call, or from a custom. I mean, no, from a current version of a running connector on IDN that failed. Okay, you can get that from the logs. You can paste it here, and you can start figuring out what's going on. I mean, what's wrong with your current call, okay? But in your local environment, and using the embedded debugger. Okay, so next I'd like to tell you about the HTTP client. Very simple client, okay, but some things to note, especially starting with the get access token. Careful with this because you may be tempted, like I did at first, to create. I mean, to negotiate the access token, if that's the authentication method that you're using in your constructor. But don't count on the constructor to be run on before every operation. Okay, so it's like the connector will live for an undetermined undetermined time span. Okay, so you cannot count on having you cannot count on running a connector from scratch or a previous instantiation or a so to speak. Okay, so what I did here, what I always do, is I create my get access token, function. Okay, this method here. And what I do is I check if the previous, I mean the previous expiry date. I mean, if this ran before and it's like a live instance, this is going to be skipped every time that it hasn't expired. But if it has expired, it will fetch the access token again, and I will save the access token in the object itself, so it can be used afterwards. Okay, and every time I run a new method, I need to fetch the token, and I do it like this. Okay, this gives me a consistent way of getting a fresh token every time without having to invoke the authentication endpoint unnecessarily. Okay, so more things. Generally, very simple calls, straight to the point. I mean, you can get this from. I like to, as I said, to document all this in an HTTP file first, so I can invoke them manually, and also I can see which kind of output I get from these calls. And one thing to really pay attention to is pagination, especially when you are listing entitlements or you're listing accounts. Every system has their own pagination or not. Okay, but if you need to handle pagination, what I do is I figure out the pagination system, and then I adapt the actual, the request template for each one of the iterations. This is how I do it here. And basically, what I wanted to point out is that I reuse the last response, and I modify the last response payload, the last response data, with everything else that was fetched before. Okay, it's like at each iteration, at each page, I put together the whole contents, and then I return the last response with all the contents. This means that in some cases you may need to basically not respect 100% the raw call, okay, that originated those contents. Okay, that would be like my only exception. Otherwise, I always return the response, and I don't take care of anything else. Take into account that depending on the API, then you will need to pass on more or less attributes for each call, and these calls are finally used here. Okay, you have this return. No, give me a sec. Here. Return create connector, where you need to implement each one of the operations. Things to note here is that generally you have an input and you have an output. For the input may vary, but the output, except for maybe the test connection. And well, let me tell you about this later. Before, I think it's a very good idea to use the logger object every time to see what comes in and what comes out. This is going to save you a lot of time when debugging or when running when fetching the logs from an existing connector on IDN. So you can see here that not the account list, but for instance, an account create. I identify the actual operation. Then I log the input, and finally I log the output. And this every time. I think it's a good habit, and it at least it helps me. Then more things to note about the input and output. We generally have this kind of outputs.
Hey, Fernando, sorry to interrupt. We might be out of time here. So if you have any final thoughts, let's get that out, and then keep going.
Okay. So well, I run out of time. I'm sorry. One of the things I wanted to mention is that when you do an account update, you need to differentiate every time of You need to differentiate the operation, and what I always do, I identify, add, and remove for entitlement operations, and finally set for attribute modifications. Before I go, also I'll tell you that when, as I mentioned before, when you create an account, okay, you need to create the account, and finally, but you also need to take into account that it may come with an entitlement addition. Okay, so you first create the account and you finally add the entitlement. Okay, folks. So I hope it was interesting and helpful to you. And that's all. Time's up.